The metal detector's steady beeping had become white noise after 6 hours of searching through the lower Ninth Ward. James Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his forehead, the August heat making his rescue worker uniform stick to his skin like a second layer. 18 years had passed since Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, but the city still held secrets buried beneath its rebuilt foundations. "Another bottle cap," James muttered, tossing the rusted piece of metal into his collection bag. As a volunteer with the New Orleans Recovery Project, he'd spent countless weekends searching for lost items that families had never recovered after the storm. Wedding rings, family photos, anything that could bring closure to those who'd lost everything. But today felt different. Today something was pulling him toward the old drainage system near Claiborne Avenue. James had been only 12 when Katrina hit. His family had evacuated to Houston, watching the horror unfold on television screens while other families weren't so lucky. The images of people stranded on rooftops, the Superdome overflowing with refugees, the levees breaking like paper walls. Those memories had shaped his entire adult life. "You finding anything good over there, James?" called out Patricia Williams, his search partner for the day. She was working a grid pattern about 50 yards away, her own metal detector sweeping methodically across the overgrown lot. "Just the usual junk," James replied, but his detector was picking up something larger. Now, the beeping intensified as he moved closer to what looked like an old drainage pipe, partially buried under years of debris and vegetation. The pipe was about 3 feet in diameter, its opening barely visible beneath a tangle of vines and rusted metal grating. James knelt down, pulling away the overgrowth with his gloved hands. The metal detector was going crazy now, its high-pitched whine indicating something significant just inside the pipe's mouth. "Patricia, come look at this," James called out, his voice carrying a note of urgency he hadn't intended. As Patricia approached, James shined his flashlight into the drainage pipe. The beam illuminated something that made his heart skip a beat. A small pile of what looked like personal belongings, preserved in a plastic bag that had somehow survived nearly 2 decades underground. "Is that what I think it is?" Patricia whispered, crouching beside James. Through the clear plastic they could see driver's licenses, social security cards, and what appeared to be family photographs. The documents were remarkably well preserved, protected by the waterproof bag and the pipe's shelter from the elements. James carefully extracted the bag from the pipe, his hands trembling slightly. The first license he could make out clearly belonged to someone named Robert Martinez, with an address in the lower Ninth Ward. The photo showed a man in his 30s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Robert Martinez," James read aloud, "born 1970. This license expired in 2006. Patricia pulled out her phone, already searching for information. "James, look at this. Robert Martinez was reported missing along with his entire family during Hurricane Katrina. They never found any trace of them." The weight of the discovery settled over James like a heavy blanket. In his hands, he held the only remaining evidence of a family that had vanished during one of America's worst natural disasters. But how had their identification ended up in this drainage pipe? And more importantly, what had happened to Robert Martinez and his family? "There's more in here," James said, carefully examining the contents of the bag. A woman's license, Angela Martinez, and what looks like school IDs for 2 children. The photographs were heartbreaking. Family vacation shots, birthday parties, school pictures. All the normal moments that make up a life, now serving as the only proof that the Martinez family had ever existed. "We need to call the police," Patricia said, but James was already pulling out his phone. As he dialed, James couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was just the beginning. After 18 years, the Martinez family's story was about to be told. But the questions multiplying in his mind suggested that their disappearance might not have been as straightforward as everyone had assumed. The drainage pipe had kept their secrets for nearly 2 decades. Now James Rodriguez was about to uncover a mystery that would challenge everything people thought they knew about Hurricane Katrina and the families who vanished in its wake. Detective Karen Thompson arrived at the scene within 30 minutes, her experienced eyes immediately assessing the situation. She'd worked missing persons cases for over 15 years, but cold cases from Katrina always carried extra weight. "Tell me exactly how you found this," she said to James, pulling on latex gloves as she approached the drainage pipe. James recounted the discovery step by step, from the metal detector's initial signal to the moment they'd identified the Martinez family documents. Detective Thompson listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification about the exact position of the bag and the condition of the pipe. "The Martinez family," she murmured, examining the licenses through the plastic. "I remember this case. Robert Martinez, 35, his wife Angela, 32, and their 2 children, Sophia, 8, and Diego, 6. They were last seen at their home on August 28, 2005, the day before Katrina made landfall." "What happened to them?" Patricia asked. Detective Thompson shook her head slowly. "That's what we never figured out. Their house was completely destroyed by the flooding, but we never found any remains. The assumption was that they'd been swept away by the storm surge and their bodies carried out to sea." James studied the drainage pipe more carefully. "But this pipe is at least 2 miles from their house. How would their IDs end up here?" "That's exactly what we need to find out," Detective Thompson replied. "This changes everything about their case." As the detective carefully bagged the evidence, James felt a chill despite the oppressive heat. The Martinez family's story was about to be reopened, and something told him that the truth would be far more complex than anyone had imagined. The drainage pipe had given up one secret, but James suspected it was hiding many more. Detective Thompson spread the Martinez family documents across her desk at the New Orleans Police Department, each piece of identification telling a fragment of a story that had remained untold for 18 years. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across the faded photographs, making the smiling faces seem almost ghostly. "James, I need you to walk me through the discovery one more time," she said, pulling out a digital recorder. "Every detail could be important." James settled into the uncomfortable plastic chair across from her desk. The police station smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a combination that reminded him of the emergency shelters he'd visited as a volunteer over the years. "I was working a grid pattern in the lower 9th Ward, about 6 blocks from where the Martinez house used to be," James began. "The metal detector started going off near this old drainage system. The pipe was mostly hidden by vegetation, like it hadn't been disturbed in years." Detective Thompson made notes as he spoke. "Had you searched that area before?" "Never that specific spot. The recovery project usually focuses on residential areas where families lost personal items. This was more of an industrial zone, not really on our usual route." "What made you decide to search there today?" James paused, considering the question. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I just felt drawn to that area, like something was calling me there." Detective Thompson looked up from her notes. "James, I've been working missing persons cases for 15 years. Sometimes the strangest leads turn out to be the most important ones. Don't dismiss your instincts." She turned to her computer and pulled up the original Martinez family case file. The screen filled with police reports, witness statements, and search records from the chaotic weeks following Hurricane Katrina. According to the original investigation, Robert Martinez was an accountant at a small firm downtown. Angela was a teacher at Martin Luther King Elementary. They lived at 1247 Desire Street with their 2 children, Sophia and Diego. James leaned forward to read the screen. "What happened the day they disappeared?" "That's where the story gets complicated," Detective Thompson said, scrolling through the reports. Their neighbor, Mrs. Beatrice Johnson, said she saw the family loading their car around 6 p.m. on August 28th. She assumed they were evacuating like most of the neighborhood, but they never made it out. "That's just it. We don't know. Their car was never found either. It was a blue 2003 Honda Accord, license plate LBJ4829. It vanished along with the family." Detective Thompson pulled up a map of New Orleans on her computer, marking the Martinez family's house and the location where James had found the IDs. The 2 points were connected by a maze of streets, canals, and drainage systems. "The distance between these 2 locations is significant," She said. If the family died in the flooding at their house, there's no natural way their identification would end up in that drainage pipe. James studied the map. Unless someone put it there deliberately. The detective's expression grew serious. That's exactly what I'm thinking. The question is who and why. She opened another file on her computer. I'm going to show you something that wasn't released to the public at the time. 3 days after Katrina, we received an anonymous tip about the Martinez family. What kind of tip? Someone called the emergency hotline and said they'd seen Robert Martinez arguing with a man in a pickup truck outside their house on the morning of August 28th. The caller said it looked like Robert was being threatened. James felt his pulse quicken. Did you ever identify the caller? No. The phone lines were chaos during those first weeks. Most calls weren't properly logged, and this one came through a cell tower that was damaged in the storm. We could never trace it back. Detective Thompson closed the file and turned back to James. But now with this new evidence, I think it's time to reopen the Martinez family case officially. What does that mean? It means we treat this as a potential homicide investigation instead of a storm casualty. And it means I need your help. James was surprised. My help? I'm just a volunteer with the Recovery Project. You found evidence that trained investigators missed for 18 years. You know the area, you understand the storm's impact, and you have access to places that regular police searches might not cover. Detective Thompson stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. James, Hurricane Katrina was chaos. In the confusion, a lot of crimes went unnoticed or uninvestigated. People disappeared, and we assumed the storm took them. But what if some of those disappearances weren't natural disasters at all? The implications of her words settled over James like a dark cloud. You think the Martinez family was murdered? I think someone wanted us to believe they died in the hurricane. Hiding their identification in that drainage pipe was supposed to keep them lost forever. But 18 years later, you found them. Detective Thompson returned to her desk and pulled out a business card. I'm assigning you as a civilian consultant on this case. Are you willing to help me find out what really happened to the Martinez family? James took the card, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What's our first step? We start by talking to the neighbors who survived. Mrs. Beatrice Johnson is still alive and living in Algiers. She was the last person to see the Martinez family alive. When do we go? Tomorrow morning. And James? Detective Thompson looked him directly in the eyes. Be prepared for what we might find. After 18 years, the truth about the Martinez family might be darker than anyone imagined. As James left the police station, the August sun was setting over New Orleans, casting long shadows across the rebuilt city. Somewhere in those shadows, the truth about Robert, Angela, Sophia, and Diego Martinez was waiting to be discovered. The duo drainage pipe had been just the beginning. Mrs. Beatrice Johnson lived in a small shotgun house in Algiers, across the Mississippi River from the lower 9th Ward, where she'd spent most of her 78 years. The morning sun filtered through, the Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees in her front yard, as James and Detective Thompson approached her front porch. Mrs. Johnson has been expecting us, Detective Thompson said, checking her notes. I called her yesterday evening. She said she's been waiting 18 years for someone to ask her about the Martinez family again. The front door opened before they could knock. A small, elderly black woman with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes greeted them. Despite her age, she moved with the confidence of someone who had survived decades of life in New Orleans. Detective Thompson, I presume, she said, extending her hand. And you must be the young man who found their things. Yes, ma'am. James Rodriguez, he replied, shaking her surprisingly strong grip. Come in, come in. I've got coffee brewing. And a lot to tell you both. Mrs. Johnson's living room was filled with photographs spanning decades, family gatherings, church events, and neighborhood celebrations. But James noticed that several frames contained pictures of the Martinez family displayed prominently on the mantelpiece. You kept their photos, Detective Thompson observed. Of course I did. Robert and Angela were good neighbors, and those children were like my own grandchildren. Sophia used to help me with my garden, and little Diego would sit on this very porch, listening to my stories. Mrs. Johnson poured coffee from an old percolator, her movements deliberate and careful. I never believed they died in that storm. Not for 1 minute. Why not? James asked. Because I saw what happened the morning they disappeared, and it wasn't natural. Detective Thompson pulled out her recorder. Mrs. Johnson, would you mind if I record this conversation? Record away, child. I've been waiting 18 years to tell someone who would actually listen. The elderly woman settled into her favorite chair, a worn recliner that faced the window overlooking the street. It was August 28, 2005. The storm was coming, and most folks were packing up to leave. I was loading my own car when I heard shouting from the Martinez house. What kind of shouting? Detective Thompson asked. Robert was arguing with a man I'd never seen before. Big fellow, maybe 6'2", wearing work clothes and driving a red pickup truck. They were standing in Robert's driveway, and the man was pointing his finger at Robert's chest like he was threatening him. James leaned forward. Could you hear what they were saying? Some of it. The stranger kept saying something about paying, what you owe and time's up. Robert was trying to calm him down, saying something about needing more time. Mrs. Johnson paused to sip her coffee, her eyes distant with the memory. Then Angela came out of the house with the children. The moment she saw that man, her face went white as a sheet. She grabbed Sophia and Diego and pulled them back inside. Did he? You recognize the man? Detective Thompson asked. Never seen him before in my life, but I'll tell you what I did see. He had a tattoo on his left forearm, some kind of snake or dragon wrapped around his arm. Detective Thompson made detailed notes. What happened next? The man got back in his truck and drove off. But before he left, he rolled down his window and said something to Robert that made him stumble backward like he'd been hit. Did you hear what he said? Mrs. Johnson nodded grimly. Clear as day. He said, "You've got until tonight or your family pays the price." The room fell silent except for the ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. James felt a chill despite the warm morning air. Mrs. Johnson, why didn't you tell the police this at the time? Detective Thompson asked gently. Child, I tried, but in those first weeks after Katrina, nobody was listening to an old black woman talking about threats and mysterious men. The police were overwhelmed, and everyone assumed the Martinez family had just been swept away by the storm like so many others. She stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, picking up a framed photo of the Martinez family at a neighborhood barbecue. But I knew Robert was in some kind of trouble. The weeks before the storm, he'd been acting strange, nervous, looking over his shoulder, jumping at every sound. Did he ever talk to you about any problems he was having? James asked. Not directly, but Angela did. About a month before Katrina. She came over here one evening, crying. Said Robert had gotten involved with some people he shouldn't have, and now they couldn't get out. Detective Thompson looked up from her notes. Did she say what kind of people? She was too scared to give details, but she did say something that stuck with me all these years. She said Robert had been trying to help someone, and it had turned into a nightmare. Mrs. Johnson returned to her chair, her expression troubled. The last time I saw the Martinez family was around 6 p.m. that evening. They were loading their car, but they didn't look like people going on a normal evacuation. They looked terrified. Did you see which direction they went? James asked. That's the strange part. Instead of heading toward the interstate like everyone else, they drove deeper into the neighborhood, toward the industrial area near the canal. Detective Thompson and James exchanged glances. The industrial area was exactly where James had found the identification documents. Mrs. Johnson, is there anything else you remember about that day? Any other details that seemed unusual? The elderly woman was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window. There is one more thing. About an hour after the Martinez family left, that red pickup truck came back. It drove slowly through the neighborhood, like the driver was looking for something. Or someone. Did you see the license plate? It was too dark by then, and the streetlights were already out because of the storm preparations. but I watched that truck from my window until it disappeared toward the same area where the Martinez family had gone. Detective Thompson and James sat in their patrol car outside Mrs. Johnson's house, the weight of her testimony settling between them like a heavy fog. The elderly woman's words had transformed the Martinez family's disappearance from a tragic storm casualty into something far more sinister. A red pickup truck with a tattooed driver making threats, Detective Thompson murmured, reviewing her notes. This changes everything about how we approach this case. James stared out the window at the rebuilt neighborhood, trying to imagine what it had looked like 18 years ago during the chaos of Hurricane Katrina. Mrs. Johnson seemed certain about what she saw. She's a credible witness. I've dealt with her before on neighborhood issues. She's sharp, observant, and has an excellent memory. If she says Robert Martinez was being threatened, I believe her. Detective Thompson started the car and pulled away from the curb. Our next stop is the New Orleans Public Library. I want to research Robert Martinez's background more thoroughly. If he was involved with dangerous people, there might be records we missed the first time. The drive back across the river gave James time to process what they'd learned. Detective, what did Mrs. Johnson mean when she said Robert was trying to help someone? That's what we need to figure out. In my experience, when ordinary people get involved with criminals, it's usually because they're being coerced or they're trying to protect someone they care about. The New Orleans Public Library's main branch had survived Hurricane Katrina, though it had required extensive renovation. Detective Thompson led James to the research section, where they could access newspaper archives and public records from 2005. Let's start with Robert Martinez's employment history, she said, settling. At a computer terminal. He worked as an accountant for Crescent City Financial Services. James pulled up a chair beside her as she navigated through the database. What kind of company was that? Small accounting firm that handled books for local businesses. According to the records, Robert had been working there for about 3 years before Katrina. Detective Thompson's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up news articles from the months leading up to Hurricane Katrina. Here's something interesting. Look at this article from July 2005. The headline read, Local Accounting Firm Under Investigation for Money Laundering. James read over her shoulder as the details unfolded. Crescent City Financial Services was being investigated by the FBI for allegedly laundering money for several criminal organizations operating in New Orleans, Detective Thompson read aloud. The investigation was suspended indefinitely due to Hurricane Katrina and the displacement of key witnesses and evidence. James felt his pulse quicken. Robert Martinez was working for a company under FBI investigation for money laundering. And, according to this article, the investigation focused on one particular client, a construction company called Gulf Coast Contractors, owned by a man named Vincent Russo. Detective Thompson clicked on another link, bringing up more information about Vincent Russo. The man's photograph showed a large, intimidating figure with dark hair and cold eyes, but what caught James's attention was the description of Russo's known associates. Look at this, James pointed to the screen. Vincent Russo was known to employ intimidation tactics against witnesses and potential informants. His associates were described as violent enforcers who used threats and physical violence to protect the organization. And here's the connection we've been looking for, Detective Thompson said, highlighting a paragraph. One of Russo's known associates was described as a large man with distinctive tattoos, including a dragon tattoo on his left forearm. The pieces were starting to come together. Robert Martinez had been working for an accounting firm that was laundering money for Vincent Russo's criminal organization. Somehow, Robert had become a threat to their operation, and they had silenced him and his family. But why would Robert become a threat, James wondered aloud. If he was just doing the books, why would they need to eliminate him? Detective Thompson leaned back in her chair, thinking. Maybe he wasn't just doing the books. Maybe he was cooperating with the FBI investigation. She pulled up another database, searching for federal court records from 2005. After several minutes of searching, she found what she was looking for. James, look at this. 3 weeks before Hurricane Katrina, the FBI filed a sealed warrant to search the offices of Crescent. City Financial Services. The warrant was based on information provided by a confidential informant within the company. Robert Martinez was the informant, James said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. It looks that way. He was probably feeding information to the FBI about Vincent Russo's money laundering operation. When Russo found out, he decided to eliminate the threat. Detective Thompson printed out the relevant documents and gathered them into a file. The timing makes perfect sense. Russo's enforcer confronted Robert on August 28th, giving him an ultimatum. When Robert couldn't or wouldn't comply, they killed him and his family. But why hide their identification in the drainage pipe? James asked. Think about it. Hurricane Katrina was the perfect cover for murder. Hundreds of people disappeared during the storm, and most were assumed to be casualties of the flooding. By hiding the Martinez family's identification, Russo ensured that they would be counted among the storm victims rather than murder victims. James felt sick to his stomach. So they've been getting away with murder for 18 years. Until now, Detective Thompson said grimly. Vincent Russo thought he was safe, but finding those IDs changes everything. We can reopen the case as a homicide investigation. She stood up and gathered the printed documents. Our next step is to find out if Vincent Russo is still alive and where he might be living now. What if he's dead? Then we look for his associates. Someone killed the Martinez family, and even if it wasn't Russo himself, his organization was responsible. As they left the library, James couldn't shake the image of Sofia and Diego Martinez from the family photographs, two innocent children who had died because their father had tried to do the right thing by cooperating with law enforcement. Detective, what are our chances of actually getting justice for the Martinez family after all these years? Detective. Thompson paused at the car door, her expression determined. James, I've been working cold cases for 15 years. The passage of time makes things harder, but it also makes criminals careless. Vincent Russo has been living for 18 years, thinking he got away with murder. That kind of confidence can make people sloppy. She opened the car door and looked back at James. Besides, we have something Russo never expected. A witness who saw his enforcer threaten Robert Martinez, and physical evidence that proves the family didn't die in the hurricane. So what's our next move? We find Vincent Russo, and when we do, we're going to ask him some very difficult questions about what happened to the Martinez family on August 28, 2005. The FBI field office in New Orleans occupied a modern building in the central business district, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun as Detective Thompson and James approached the entrance. Agent Sarah Chen, who had agreed to meet with them, was waiting in the lobby. Detective Thompson, thank you for reaching out, Agent Chen said, shaking hands with both of them. When you mentioned the Martinez family and Vincent Russo, you definitely got my attention. Agent Chen was in her early 40s, with short black hair and the kind of focused intensity that James associated with federal investigators. She led them through security and up to a conference room on the 7th floor. I was a junior agent back in 2005, she explained as they settled around a polished conference table. The Russo investigation was one of my first major cases, and it's always bothered me that we never got to complete it. Detective Thompson spread out the documents they'd gathered. We have reason to believe that Vincent Russo murdered the Martinez family to prevent Robert from testifying against his organization. Agent Chen examined the evidence carefully, her expression growing more serious with each document. This fits with what we suspected at the time. Robert Martinez had been providing us with detailed financial records showing how Russo was using Gulf Coast contractors to launder money from drug trafficking and illegal gambling operations. How much evidence did Robert provide? James asked. Enough to build a solid RICO case against Russo and his entire organization. Robert had been copying financial documents for months, documenting every transaction that passed through Crescent City Financial Services. Agent Chen pulled out a thick file from her briefcase. What I'm about to show you is still classified, but given the circumstances, I think it's relevant to your investigation. She opened the file to reveal photographs, financial documents, and surveillance reports. Robert Martinez wasn't just a reluctant witness. He actively sought us out after discovering what his employer was really doing. What made him come forward? Detective Thompson asked. According to his handler, Robert found out that Russo was using the accounting firm to launder money from human trafficking operations. When he learned that children were being victimized, he couldn't stay silent. James felt a chill. So he was trying to protect other children by risking his own family? Exactly. Robert Martinez was a good man who found himself in an impossible situation. He knew that cooperating with us put his family at risk. But he also knew that staying silent meant more children would be hurt. Agent Chen turned to another section of the file. We had arranged to move the Martinez family into witness protection on August 30th, 2005. But Hurricane Katrina hit on August 29th, and by then, they had already disappeared. What happened to Vincent Russo after the storm? Detective Thompson asked. That's where the story gets complicated. Russo's organization was scattered by Katrina, just like everything else in New Orleans. Some of his associates were arrested on other charges, some died in the storm, and others simply disappeared. Agent Chen pulled out a more recent photograph. But Vincent Russo survived. He relocated to Houston after Katrina and rebuilt his operation there. He's been under surveillance by the Houston field office for the past 10 years. James studied the photograph. Russo had aged considerably since 2005, his hair now gray and his face more lined, but his eyes still held the same cold calculation. Is he still active in criminal enterprises? Detective Thompson asked. Very much so. He's expanded into cybercrime and identity theft, in addition to his traditional money laundering operations. The Houston office has been building a case against him, but they need more evidence. Agent Chen closed the file and looked directly at both of them. Finding the Martinez family's identification could be the break we've been waiting for. If we can prove that Russo murdered a federal witness, it gives us leverage to bring down his entire current operation. What do you need from us? James asked. First, we need to establish a clear chain of custody for the evidence you found. The identification documents need to be processed by our forensics lab to confirm their authenticity and look for any additional evidence. Detective Thompson nodded. We can arrange that. Second, we need to locate the Martinez family's remains. If Russo killed them, he had to dispose of the bodies somewhere. Finding them would give us the physical evidence we need for a murder prosecution. James thought about the drainage pipe where he'd found the identification. Agent Chen, the IDs were hidden in a very specific location. Do you think Russo might have used that area to dispose of other evidence? It's possible. Criminal organizations often have preferred locations for disposing of evidence. If Russo used that drainage system once, he might have used it multiple times. Agent Chen stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. There's something else you should know. 3 other families disappeared during Hurricane Katrina under suspicious circumstances. At the time, we assumed they were storm casualties, but now I'm wondering if Russo eliminated multiple witnesses. 3 other families? Detective Thompson asked, her voice tight with concern. The Nguyen family, the Williams family, and the Garcia family all had some connection to businesses that were under investigation for money laundering. All disappeared on August 28th or 29th, 2005. The implications were staggering. Vincent Russo hadn't just murdered the Martinez family. He had potentially used Hurricane Katrina as cover to eliminate multiple witnesses and their families. Agent Chen, what's our next step? James asked. We're going to form a joint task force between the FBI, NOPD, and the Houston field office. Our goal is to build an airtight case against Vincent Russo for the murders of the Martinez family and potentially 3 other families. She turned back to face them. James, your discovery of those identification documents has opened up a case that could bring justice to multiple families and take down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the Gulf Coast region. Detective Thompson gathered up their documents. How long do you think this investigation will take? If we're thorough and careful, probably 6 to 8 months. But James, I want you to understand something important. Once we start this investigation, Vincent Russo will eventually find out. He's going to know that someone is looking into the Martinez family's disappearance. James felt a chill of fear. Are you saying I'm in danger? I'm saying that Vincent Russo has killed entire families to protect his secrets. We'll provide protection for you and anyone else involved in this investigation, but you need to understand the risks. As they left the FBI building, James looked out at the bustling streets of New Orleans, wondering how many secrets the city still held. The Martinez family's story was just beginning to unfold, but already it was clear that their disappearance was part of something much larger and more sinister than anyone had imagined. The drainage pipe had revealed more than just identification documents. It had opened a window into 18 years of hidden crimes and buried truths. The Joint Task Force established their headquarters in a secure conference room at the FBI field office, with whiteboards covering every wall and evidence boxes stacked in neat rows along the windows. James found himself officially designated as a civilian consultant, working alongside Detective Thompson, Agent Chen, and 2 additional FBI agents who had flown in from Houston. Let's start with what we know for certain, Agent Chen said, standing before a timeline that stretched across the main whiteboard. August 28, 2005, Vincent Russo's enforcer threatens Robert Martinez. That evening, the Martinez family leaves their home and drives toward the industrial area near the canal. Agent Mike Torres from the Houston field office added his own notes to the timeline. Based on our surveillance of Russo's current operation, we know he typically uses the same methods repeatedly. If he killed the Martinez family, he probably followed a pattern he'd used before. What kind of pattern? James asked. Russo's organization has a specific way of eliminating threats. They isolate the target, usually by forcing them to a secondary location, then dispose of the evidence in a way that makes the death look accidental or natural. Detective Thompson pulled out a map of New Orleans and marked several locations. We've identified 3 potential sites where Russo might have taken the Martinez family. All are in the industrial area near where James found the identification documents. The first location was an abandoned warehouse that had been owned by one of Russo's shell companies. The second was a boat launch that provided access to the canal system. The third was a construction site that had been active in 2005, but was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. We're going to search all 3 locations, Agent Chen announced. But we need to be systematic and thorough. If we find evidence, we can't afford to contaminate it or miss anything important. James studied the map, trying to imagine the Martinez family's final hours. Agent Torres, you said Russo uses secondary locations. Why not just kill them at their house? Too much risk of witnesses or evidence. By forcing them to leave their home, Russo could control the environment and ensure that any evidence would be destroyed by the hurricane. Agent Chen pulled out a folder containing surveillance photographs from Houston. These are recent photos of Vincent Russo and his current associates. We need to be aware that some of these people might still be in the New Orleans area. The photographs showed a collection of hard-faced men, all with the kind of cold eyes that James associated with career criminals. One photo in particular caught his attention, a large man with graying hair and visible tattoos on his forearms. That's Marcus Webb, Agent Torres explained. He's been with Russo's organization for over 20 years. Based on the description from Mrs. Johnson, he's probably the man who threatened Robert Martinez. Is Webb still active? Detective Thompson asked. Very much so. He's Russo's primary enforcer and has been linked to at least 6 murders in the Houston area over the past decade. Agent Chen marked Webb's photograph on the whiteboard. If we can prove that Webb killed the Martinez family, we can use that to pressure him into testifying against Russo. The team spent the next several hours planning their search strategy. Each location would be examined by forensic specialists using ground-penetrating radar, metal detectors, and cadaver dogs. James would accompany the teams to provide insight into the area's geography and drainage systems. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Agent Chen said as the meeting was winding down. Security for everyone involved in this investigation. She pulled out a stack of documents. Vincent Russo has extensive connections throughout the Gulf Coast region. He has informants in law enforcement, city government, and the business community. We have to assume that he'll eventually learn about our investigation. James felt his stomach tighten. What kind of security are we talking about? For you, James, we're recommending a safe house until this investigation is complete. Russo has killed entire families before, and we can't take any chances with your safety. Detective Thompson looked concerned. What about Mrs. Johnson? She's the key witness to the threats against Robert Martinez. We're moving her to a secure location as well. She'll be protected by federal marshals until we can arrest Russo and his associates. Agent Torres pulled out his phone and showed James a text message. We received this about an hour ago from our Houston surveillance team. Vincent Russo has been asking questions about New Orleans, specifically about any recent discoveries related to Hurricane Katrina. The message sent a chill through James. He already knows something. It appears so. Which means we need to move quickly. Every day we delay gives Russo more time to cover his tracks or eliminate potential witnesses. Agent Chen stood up and addressed the entire team. We start the searches tomorrow morning. James, you'll be moved to the safe house tonight. Detective Thompson, I want you to coordinate with NOPD to ensure we have adequate backup for all search operations. As the meeting broke up, James found himself alone with Agent Chen for a moment. Agent Chen, what are our real chances of finding evidence after 18 years? She considered the question carefully. James, I've worked cases where evidence has been preserved for decades under the right conditions. The drainage system where you found the identification documents is actually ideal for preservation, cool, dry, and protected from the elements. But what if we don't find anything? Then we build our case on the evidence we have. Mrs. Johnson's testimony, the identification documents, and the connection to Russo's money laundering operation. It might not be enough for a murder conviction, but it could be enough to bring federal charges that put Russo away for life. Agent Chen gathered her files and prepared to leave. James, I want you to understand something important. What you've done by finding those identification documents has given 4 families the chance for justice they've been waiting 18 years to receive. 4 families? The Martinez family, and the 3 other families that disappeared during Katrina. If we can prove Russo killed the Martinez family, we can reopen investigations into all of them. As James left the FBI building that evening, he looked back at the city skyline and thought about the Martinez family. Somewhere in New Orleans, their remains were waiting to be found. And somewhere else, Vincent Russo was probably planning how to silence the investigation before it could expose his crimes. The safe house would provide protection, but James knew that the real safety would only come when Vincent Russo and his organization were finally brought to justice. The search for the Martinez family was about to begin. The safe house was a modest 2-story home in Metairie, surrounded by a high fence and equipped with security cameras at every corner. James spent a restless night reviewing case files and thinking about the searches that would begin at dawn. Agent Chen had provided him with detailed maps and photographs of the 3 target locations, and he studied them until he could visualize every detail. At 6 a.m., a convoy of FBI vehicles, NOPD units, and forensic trucks assembled at the first location, the abandoned warehouse that had once been owned by one of Russo's shell companies. The building stood like a concrete monument to decay, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in 18 years of graffiti and weather damage. The ground-penetrating radar will give us the best chance of finding anything buried here, explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, the lead forensic specialist. We're looking for any anomalies in the soil that might indicate disturbed earth or buried objects. James watched as the team methodically swept the area around the warehouse, their equipment beeping and clicking as it probed beneath the surface. Detective Thompson stood beside him, both of them hoping for a breakthrough that would finally provide answers. James, look at this, Dr. Martinez called out after 2 hours of searching. The radar had detected something unusual near the back corner of the warehouse. A rectangular anomaly about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, buried approximately 4 feet underground. That's the right size and depth for a grave, Detective Thompson said quietly. The excavation began immediately, with forensic specialists carefully removing layers of soil while photographing and documenting every step. James found himself holding his breath as the dig progressed, knowing that they might be about to uncover the Martinez family's final resting place. But after 4 hours of careful excavation, They found only an old septic tank that had been buried and forgotten decades earlier. The disappointment was palpable, but Agent Chen reminded the team that they still had 2 more locations to search. The second location was the boat launch near the industrial canal. This site presented different challenges. The area had been partially flooded multiple times since Hurricane Katrina, and the soil was saturated with water and debris. If bodies were disposed of here, they might have been weighted down and thrown into the canal, Agent Torres explained. We'll need to use sonar equipment to search the bottom of the waterway. The sonar search revealed several large objects on the canal bottom, but when divers investigated, they found only construction debris and abandoned vehicles. The canal had been used as a dumping ground for decades, making it nearly impossible to identify specific evidence related to the Martinez family. As the afternoon wore on, James began to worry that they wouldn't find anything at any of the locations. But Agent Chen remained optimistic as they moved to the third and final site, the construction area where a new office building had been under construction in 2005. This location has the best potential, she explained to James as they surveyed the area. The construction was halted by Hurricane Katrina and never resumed. If Russo buried the family here, the evidence would be undisturbed. The site was now an empty lot overgrown with weeds and small trees, but the concrete foundation of the abandoned building was still visible beneath the vegetation. Dr. Martinez began her radar sweep at the perimeter of the foundation, working her way systematically toward the center. I'm getting multiple readings. Here, she announced after an hour of searching. There are several anomalies in the soil, all clustered in this area near what would have been the building's basement. The radar had detected 4 distinct objects buried at varying depths. 3 were roughly human-sized, while the 4th was smaller, about the size of a child. James felt his heart racing as the excavation began. This time, the soil gave up its secrets more readily. At a depth of 5 feet, the forensic team uncovered the first piece of evidence, a fragment of blue fabric that matched the description of the shirt Robert Martinez had been wearing when he disappeared. "We've found them," Detective Thompson said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. The excavation continued with painstaking care. Over the next 6 hours, the forensic team uncovered the remains of 4 individuals, 2 adults and 2 children. The bodies had been wrapped in plastic and buried in a carefully constructed grave that had been concealed beneath construction debris. Dr. Martinez worked methodically to document every detail of the burial site. Based on the positioning and the evidence we're finding, it appears that all 4 victims were killed execution-style with gunshots to the head. James had to step away from the excavation site as the reality of what they'd found hit him. The Martinez family, Robert, Maria, Sophia, and Diego, had been murdered in cold blood and buried like discarded trash. The family photographs he'd seen seemed to mock the brutality of their final moments. Agent Chen approached him as the forensic team continued their work. "James, I know this is difficult to see, but what we've found here is going to bring justice to this family. How can you be sure?" James asked, his voice shaky with emotion. "Because Vincent Russo made a mistake. Look at this." She held up an evidence bag containing a small metal object. "We found this bullet casing in the grave. It's from a .45 caliber pistol, and it has distinctive markings that will allow us to match it to the weapon that fired it." Agent Torres joined them, holding another evidence bag. "And we found this in Robert Martinez's pocket." The bag contained a small digital recording device no bigger than a matchbook. "A recording device?" James asked. "Robert was wearing a wire when he was killed. If this device still works, it might contain a recording of his final conversation with his killers." The implications were staggering. Not only had they found the Martinez family's remains, but they might also have a recording of their murder. If the device contained usable audio, it could provide direct evidence linking Vincent Russo to the killings. "How long will it take to analyze the recording device?" Detective Thompson asked. "Our tech specialists in Quantico can have preliminary results within 24 hours, Agent Chen replied. "If there's recoverable audio on this device, we'll know exactly what happened to the Martinez family in their final moments." As the sun set over New Orleans, the forensic team completed their excavation and began the process of transporting the remains to the coroner's office for formal identification and autopsy. James watched as 4 body bags were loaded into the coroner's van, finally bringing the Martinez family home after 18 years. "What happens now?" James asked Agent Chen. "Now we build our case. We have the bodies, we have evidence linking the burial site to Vincent Russo's organization, and we potentially have a recording of the murders. Tomorrow we start the process of bringing the killers to justice." Agent Torres received a phone call and stepped away to take it. When he returned, his expression was grim. That was the Houston field office. Vincent Russo left Houston this morning, and his current whereabouts are unknown. "He's running," Detective Thompson said. "Or he's coming here to clean up loose ends," Agent Chen replied. "Either way, we need to accelerate our timeline. James, you're staying in the safe house until we have Russo in custody." As they left the excavation site, James looked back at the empty lot where the Martinez family had been buried for 18 years. Their long wait for justice was finally over, but the dangerous work of bringing their killers to trial was just beginning. Vincent Russo was somewhere out there, and he knew that his past was finally catching up with him. The FBI's Technical Analysis Laboratory in Quantico worked through the night to extract data from the recording device found with Robert Martinez's remains. At 8 a.m. the following morning, Agent Chen received a call that would change everything about their investigation. The device was damaged but not destroyed, she announced to the task force team assembled in the secure conference room. "Our technicians were able to recover approximately 12 minutes of audio from the final recording." James sat forward in his chair, his heart pounding as Agent Chen prepared to play the recovered audio. Detective Thompson and Agent Torres flanked him, all of them knowing that they were about to hear the final moments of the Martinez family's life. "Before we listen to this, I need to warn everyone that the content is extremely disturbing," Agent Chen said. "We're going to hear the murder of an entire family, including 2 children." She pressed play on the digital audio player, and Robert Martinez's voice filled the room, tinged with fear but still trying to remain calm. "Please, you don't have to do this. I'll stop cooperating with the FBI. I'll disappear with my family. You'll never hear from us again," a gruff voice responded. The same voice that Mrs. Johnson had described as belonging to the tattooed man in the red pickup truck. "It's too late for that, Martinez. You already gave them too much information. Mr. Russo can't take the risk that you'll change your mind again." "My children have nothing to do with this," Robert's voice pleaded. "Let them go. Kill me if you have to, but please let my family live." "Sorry, Martinez, Mr. Russo's orders were very specific. No witnesses, no loose ends." The audio captured the sound of Maria Martinez crying in the background, and the terrified voices of Sofia and Diego asking their father what was happening. James had to close his eyes as he listened to the family's final moments. "You're making a mistake," Robert's voice continued, growing more desperate. "The FBI knows I'm cooperating. If my family disappears, they'll know you killed us." The gruff voice laughed coldly. "Hurricane Katrina is going to hit tomorrow, Martinez. By the time the storm is over, half of New Orleans will be underwater. Your family is going to be just another casualty of the hurricane. But people will look for us. Our neighbors know we were planning to evacuate. Your neighbors are going to have bigger problems to worry about. And even if someone does look for you, they'll never find your bodies. We've got a nice spot picked out where you'll stay buried until the end of time." The recording captured the sound of footsteps and muffled voices as the family was apparently moved to the location where they would be killed. Then came the unmistakable voice of Vincent Russo himself. "Robert Martinez, you made a very poor choice when you decided to betray my organization. Mr. Russo, please." Robert's voice was barely a whisper now. "I was just trying to do the right thing. The right thing would have been to keep your mouth shut and do your job. Instead, you decided to play hero, and now your entire family is going to pay the price." The recording captured Sofia Martinez's voice, small and frightened. "Daddy, I'm scared. When are we going home?" "Soon, sweetheart," Robert replied, his voice breaking. "We're going home very soon." What followed were the sounds that would haunt James for the rest of his life. 4 gunshots in rapid succession, followed by silence. Vincent Russo had personally executed the entire Martinez family, including 2 innocent children, whose only crime was being related to a man who tried to do the right thing. Agent Chen stopped the recording and the room fell into stunned silence. James felt sick to his stomach and he could see that Detective Thompson was struggling to maintain her composure. That recording is going to convict Vincent Russo of 4 counts of first-degree murder, Agent Torres said finally. His voice is clearly identifiable and he explicitly admits to ordering the killings. But first we have to find him, Agent Chen replied, and based on what we just heard, Russo is extremely dangerous and completely ruthless. He won't hesitate to kill anyone who threatens his freedom. Detective Thompson pulled out her phone and made a call to NOPD headquarters. I'm putting out a BOLO alert for Vincent Russo and Marcus Webb. Every police officer in Louisiana needs to know that these men are armed and extremely dangerous. Agent Chen was already coordinating with FBI field offices across the country. We're issuing federal warrants for both men on charges of murder, racketeering, and witness intimidation. The U.S. Marshal Service is being brought in to assist with the manhunt. James listened to the flurry of activity around him, but his mind kept returning to the voices on the recording, especially Sofia and Diego Martinez, 2 children who had died because their father tried to protect other children from human trafficking. Agent Chen, what are the chances that Russo will try to flee the country? James asked. High. He has the resources and connections to disappear permanently if he reaches certain international destinations. That's why we need to find him quickly. Agent Torres received a phone call and stepped away to take it. When he returned, his expression was urgent. That was the Houston field office. They've been monitoring Russo's known associates, and 3 of them have suddenly gone missing. It looks like Russo is calling in his entire organization. For what purpose? Detective Thompson asked. Either to help him escape or to eliminate anyone who might be able to testify against him. Based on what we know about Russo's methods, he's probably planning to tie up all loose ends before he disappears. The implications were chilling. Russo had already demonstrated his willingness to kill entire families to protect his secrets. Now that he knew the Martinez family's bodies had been found, he might be planning to eliminate everyone connected to the investigation. James, I want you to understand something, Agent Chen said seriously. You're the person who found the evidence that's going to bring down Vincent Russo's organization. That makes you his primary target. What about Mrs. Johnson? She's the witness who saw Marcus Webb threaten Robert Martinez. She's already been moved to a secure federal facility, but Russo doesn't know about her testimony yet. You're the one he's going to focus on. Agent Torres pulled up a map of the Gulf Coast region on his laptop. Based on Russo's past behavior, he's probably planning to eliminate James and then flee to Mexico or Central America. He has connections in both places that could help him disappear permanently. So what's our strategy? Detective Thompson asked. Agent Chen stood up and addressed the entire team. We're going to use James as bait. James felt his blood run cold. Excuse me? We're going to make it appear that you're vulnerable while actually surrounding you with federal agents. When Russo comes for you, we'll be ready for him. That sounds incredibly dangerous, James said, his voice shaking slightly. It is dangerous, Agent Chen admitted, but it's also our best chance to capture Russo before he escapes or kills more innocent people. And James, you won't be alone. We'll have a full tactical team protecting you. Agent Torres pulled out a detailed plan that had apparently been prepared in advance. We'll move you to a safe house that appears to have minimal security, but is actually surrounded by federal agents. We'll monitor all communications and have backup teams positioned throughout the area. Detective Thompson looked concerned. What if something goes wrong? What if Russo brings more firepower than you're expecting? Then we'll be ready for that too, Agent Chen replied. James, I won't lie to you. This operation carries significant risks. But Vincent Russo has been killing innocent people for decades, and this might be our only chance to stop him. James thought about the recording they'd just heard, about Sofia and Diego Martinez crying for their father in their final moments. He thought about the 3 other families that had disappeared during Hurricane Katrina, and about all the future victims who would die if Russo escaped justice. When do we start? James asked. Agent Chen smiled grimly. Tonight. Vincent Russo is about to discover that some secrets refuse to stay buried. The safe house chosen for the operation was a single-story ranch home in a quiet residential neighborhood in Kenner, about 15 minutes from downtown New Orleans. To any observer, it appeared to be an ordinary house with minimal security. Exactly the kind of location where a witness might be hidden while believing himself to be safe. But appearances were deceiving. FBI tactical teams were positioned in houses on both sides of the target residence, with additional agents stationed in unmarked vehicles throughout the neighborhood. Snipers occupied strategic positions on nearby rooftops, and electronic surveillance equipment monitored every approach to the house. James sat in the living room, wearing a bulletproof vest beneath his shirt and trying to appear relaxed while knowing that Vincent Russo might appear at any moment. Agent Chen remained in constant communication with him through a nearly invisible earpiece, while Detective Thompson monitored the operation from a command post 3 blocks away. "Remember, James, your job is to stay calm and follow our instructions." "Exactly," Agent Chen's voice whispered in his ear. "If Russo shows up, we'll handle everything. You just need to keep him talking until we can move in." The waiting was the hardest part. James tried to read a book, watch television, even make himself a sandwich, but his mind kept returning to the recording of the Martinez family's murder. Vincent Russo had killed 2 children without hesitation, and James knew that the man wouldn't think twice about killing him as well. At 11:47 p.m., the surveillance teams reported movement in the area. A dark sedan with tinted windows had driven slowly past the house twice, and the occupants appeared to be conducting reconnaissance. "That's them." Agent Torres's voice came through the earpiece. "We've identified Vincent Russo in the passenger seat and Marcus Webb driving. There's at least one additional person in the back seat." James felt his heart rate spike as he realized that the men who had murdered the Martinez family were now circling his location like predators stalking their prey. "James, and stay calm." Agent Chen's voice was steady and reassuring. "We have eyes on them, and they can't make a move without us knowing about it." The sedan disappeared for nearly an hour, and James began to wonder if Russo had decided the location was too risky. But at 12:52 a.m., the surveillance teams reported new activity. "We have 3 individuals approaching the house on foot from the rear," Agent Torres reported. "They're armed and moving tactically. This is it." James moved to the center of the living room as instructed, positioning himself where he would be visible through the front windows, but protected by the bulletproof vest and the tactical teams surrounding the house. The first sign of the intruders was a soft scratching sound at the back door. Someone was picking the lock. James forced himself to breathe normally as he heard footsteps moving through the kitchen toward the living room. Vincent Russo appeared, first looking older and more haggard than in his photographs, but still radiating the cold menace that had made him one of the Gulf Coast's most feared criminals. Marcus Webb followed close behind, his massive frame filling the doorway and his tattooed arms clearly visible in the dim light. "James Morrison," Russo said, his voice carrying the same chilling tone that James had heard on the recording. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble." "I don't know what you're talking about," James replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Don't insult my intelligence. You found something that belonged to me, and now the FBI thinks they can use it to destroy my organization." Webb moved to block the front door while a third man, younger and nervous-looking, positioned himself near the kitchen entrance. All 3 were armed with pistols, and James could see that they were prepared for violence. "The Martinez family didn't belong to you," James said, surprised by his own boldness. "They were innocent people who you murdered in cold blood." Russo's eyes flashed with anger. "Robert Martinez was a traitor who betrayed my trust. He knew the consequences of his actions. He was trying to protect children from human trafficking. He was a hero." "He was a fool," Russo snarled. "And now you're going to join him and his family." Webb raised his pistol, but before he could fire, Agent Chen's voice exploded through hidden speakers throughout the house. "FBI, drop your weapons. You're surrounded." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Webb spun toward the front door, firing wildly as tactical agents burst through the entrance. The third man tried to flee toward the kitchen but ran directly into another team of agents coming through the back door. Vincent Russo, however, focused entirely on James. "You destroyed everything I built," he screamed, raising his pistol. James dove behind the couch as Russo fired, the bullet splintering the wood frame inches from his head. But before Russo could fire again, Agent Torres appeared from the hallway and tackled him to the ground. The gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity to James. When the shooting stopped, Marcus Webb lay motionless near the front door, killed by FBI snipers as he tried to escape. The third man had surrendered immediately and was being handcuffed by tactical agents. Vincent Russo was alive but wounded, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead where he had struck the coffee table during his struggle with Agent Torres. As the agent secured him with handcuffs, he looked directly at James with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over," Russo said through gritted teeth. "My organization is bigger than you know. Someone will finish what I started." "Your organization is finished," Agent Chen replied as she entered the room. "We've been monitoring your communications for months. Every one of your associates is being arrested as we speak." She pulled out her phone and showed Russo a series of text messages from FBI field offices across the country. "Houston, Miami, Atlanta, Phoenix, we've rolled up your entire network. You're the last one, Vincent." The realization that his criminal empire had been completely destroyed seemed to hit Russo harder than any physical blow. He slumped in his restraints, finally understanding that his decades of violence and intimidation had come to an end. As the paramedics treated Russo's injuries and prepared him for transport to federal custody, Detective Thompson approached James. "Are you okay?" James nodded, though his hands were still shaking from the adrenaline. "Is it really over?" "For Vincent Russo, yes. He's going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison, and he'll probably face the death penalty for murdering the Martinez family." Agent Chen joined them as the last of the tactical equipment was being packed away. "James, what you did tonight took incredible courage. Vincent Russo has been one of the most wanted criminals in the country, and your discovery of those identification documents is what finally brought him down. What about the other families that disappeared during Hurricane Katrina? We'll be reopening those investigations now that we have Russo in custody. With his organization dismantled, other witnesses may be willing to come forward." As James left the safe house for the final time, he thought about the Martinez family and the justice that had finally been served. Robert, Maria, Sophia, and Diego could finally rest in peace, knowing that their killer would never hurt another innocent family. The drainage pipe had revealed more than just identification documents. It had exposed a network of corruption and violence that had operated in the shadows for nearly 2 decades. And now, thanks to one man's decision to do the right thing 18 years ago, and another man's determination to seek the truth, that network had finally been brought to light. 6 months later, James stood in the federal courthouse in New Orleans, watching as Vincent Russo was led into the courtroom in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. The man who had once commanded a criminal empire spanning multiple states now looked small and defeated, his gray hair unkempt and his eyes hollow with the knowledge of his fate. The trial had been a media sensation, with news outlets from across the country covering the story of the family that had been murdered during Hurricane Katrina, and the rescue worker who had discovered their remains 18 years later. James had testified for 3 days, describing in detail how he had found the identification documents and the investigation that had followed. But the most powerful evidence had been the recording of the Martinez family's murder. When the audio was played in court, several jurors had wept openly, and even the judge had struggled to maintain his composure. Vincent Russo's own voice had condemned him, leaving no doubt about his guilt. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Patricia Williams asked as the 12 men and women filed back into the courtroom. "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreman replied, standing with a piece of paper in his hand. James held his breath as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. 4 counts of first-degree murder, racketeering, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours. Judge Williams scheduled the sentencing hearing for the following week, but everyone in the courtroom knew what the outcome would be. Vincent Russo would either receive life in prison without the possibility of parole, or he would face the death penalty. After the verdict was announced, James found himself surrounded by reporters asking for his reaction. But he declined to comment, instead walking quietly to the courthouse steps where Detective Thompson and Agent Chen were waiting for him. "How do you feel?" Detective Thompson asked. "Relieved," James replied honestly. "And sad. Nothing we did here today can bring back the Martinez family, but at least their killer will never hurt anyone else." Agent Chen pulled out a folder containing updates on the other cases they had reopened. "James, I thought you'd want to know. We've made arrests in 2 of the other family disappearances from Hurricane Katrina. Russo's associates are starting to talk, and we're learning about crimes that go back decades." "What about the families? Have you found their remains?" "We found the Nguyen family last month, buried in a construction site in Metairie. We're still searching for the Williams and Garcia families, but we have strong leads." James thought about all the families who had suffered because of Vincent Russo's criminal organization. The Martinez family had been just one piece of a much larger puzzle of violence and corruption. "Agent Chen, what happens to me now? Do I need to worry about retaliation from Russo's remaining associates?" Russo's organization has been completely dismantled. The few associates who weren't arrested have fled the country or gone into hiding. "You're safe, James." Detective Thompson smiled and shook his hand. "James, what you did took incredible courage. You could have just turned in those identification documents and walked away, but instead you helped us bring a killer to justice." "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Agent Chen corrected him. "Most people would have minded their own business. You chose to fight for a family you'd never met, and because of that choice, Vincent Russo will never kill again." As James walked away from the courthouse, he thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. If Hurricane Katrina hadn't damaged the drainage system, if he hadn't been assigned to that particular repair job, if he hadn't been curious enough to investigate the pipe thoroughly, Vincent Russo might have continued killing for years to come. But sometimes, James reflected, the universe has a way of ensuring that justice eventually prevails. The Martinez family had waited 18 years for their killer to be brought to trial, but their patience had finally been rewarded. A week later, James returned to the courthouse for Vincent Russo's sentencing hearing. The judge had decided against the death penalty, instead sentencing Russo to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At 72 years old, Russo would spend his remaining years in a federal penitentiary, never again able to hurt innocent people. As Russo was led away for the final time, he turned and looked directly at James. But instead of the hatred that had been in his eyes during the arrest, James saw something different, a kind of resigned acceptance that his reign of terror had finally ended. After the sentencing, James drove to St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, where the Martinez family had finally been laid to rest in a proper burial. The headstone was simple but dignified, bearing the names of Robert, Maria, Sofia, and Diego Martinez, along with the inscription, "Beloved family, justice delayed but not denied." James placed a bouquet of flowers at the grave and stood quietly for several minutes, thinking about the family he had never met, but whose story had changed his life forever. Robert Martinez had died trying to protect other children from human trafficking. Maria had died supporting her husband's decision to do the right thing. Sofia and Diego had died simply because they were loved by parents who refused to stay silent in the face of evil. "Thank you," James said quietly to the headstone. "Thank you for giving me the chance to help bring your killer to justice." As he walked back to his car, James's phone rang. It was Agent Chen, calling with news about another cold case that might benefit from his expertise in drainage systems and underground infrastructure. "James, we have a situation in Baton Rouge. A construction crew found some suspicious items in a storm drain, and we think they might be connected to a missing person case from 2010. Would you be willing to take a look?" James smiled as he started his car. The Martinez family's case was closed, but there were other families out there still waiting for answers, still hoping for justice. "I'll be there tomorrow morning," James replied. The work of seeking truth and justice never really ends. But sometimes, if you're willing to look closely enough and care deeply enough, you can help ensure that the victims are not forgotten and that their killers are finally held accountable for their crimes. The drainage pipe had given up its secrets, but James knew that there were other secrets waiting to be discovered, other families waiting for their stories to be told, and he would be there to help tell them. Note: this story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.